Thank you very much, Anna. I present here about once a year, and I often seem to get the winding down for Christmas slot. So as I don't do research, what shall I talk about? And I recently had a couple of conversations with UCL people where they mentioned casually how they are routinely using AI in their work. And I've actively ignored AI up to this point, and I thought that maybe now is a good time to wake up and ask if the time is right. Can AI be genuinely useful in our everyday work? And by genuinely useful, I meant in a way that we should actively start to use the tools and we'll see their benefit. So I've immersed myself for a few weeks and hope this will be of interest and maybe even fun in places. So this is my one shot, so I'm going to be quite fast. I may even miss whole sections if time runs away, though I do have permission to take a little longer than normal. But don't worry about the detail, and the slides and recording will be available for anyone who wants them, but just see if anything looks interesting to you. So I'm going to do an introduction, and then I need to say something about how generative AI works, I think, before we get on to talking about how it might actively be useful. And I'm going to try and do some bits live, so let's just see whether those work or it's going to be a complete disaster. So, introduction. So a couple of transformative moments, transformative technologies that I remember from the past. Back in 1986, I remember the Carrie Mullis Nature paper on PCR coming out and giving a departmental presentation on it and saying how this is going to change biological research, which it did. Then 1999, late 1999, I was introduced in a chance conversation to Google search, which was so much better than the predecessors and has changed the world. And then almost exactly 2 years ago, astonishingly short time ago, OpenAI announced their GPT-3 AI tool. And a few weeks later, a friend said to me, "You've got to look at this." And so this exploded generative AI into the public consciousness, and its growth has been amazing. So within 2 months, they got 100 million users. And since then, the changes have been extraordinary. So I'm going to now open up ChatGPT and do a couple of exercises. So if you, hopefully this will work. If you go to ChatGPT, I'm going to go here. If you go to ChatGPT, this is what you see. This happens to be the paid version, doesn't matter. The free version will look very much like this. And if you haven't used it, you just get this bit here. You write something and you say, for example, write a letter asking the microscope engineer to return because they are still not working. And you get these really excellent letters, far more clearer, more nicer, but firmer than I would tend to write myself. So they're usually very, very good, these. So we follow the steps. Can you please schedule a follow-up visit, etc. So things like letters are great. And then you might say, you might do something completely different, and you say, describe briefly the invention of the microscope. And it'll tell you, and you can just see how quickly it comes back at you, and it just produces this text. And just something else, something completely random, draw an image of a fox using a microscope. And CCM people will know the relevance of the fox, because we have fox companions here sometimes using a microscope. And really quite quickly, you suddenly get an image of a fox using a microscope. The other thing I want to say, I think, which is important, is that if you take this text and you just say do it again, just say exactly the same, and what will normally happen is that what will come out at the other end will be perfectly good, but will be different. So here it starts. This one starts off. The invention of the microscope dates back to the late 16th century. This one says the microscope was invented in the late 16th century, and other bits differ. So basically, generative AI produces new text each time. Usually that it's, or it'll produce a different image, for instance. Every time you do it, something new comes out. So it is genuinely novel. So coming back to my slides, I then did a quick survey. I asked you and some other people about how you use AI. Out of 24 people who replied, 18 people said they use it a little, a few use it quite a lot, and most of the users who were using it, though, were just starting to dip their toes into AI and see how it worked. And when I kind of summarized what people do, people use it for generating ideas, language translation, understanding and summarizing documents, producing visuals, helping them with their writing, some programming, doing searches instead of using Google, and some data manipulation. I also asked them what they'd like to use Gen AI for, and very similar things came up. Understanding, writing, research, translation, meetings. Several people mentioned transcribing and summarizing minutes of meetings. Several people mentioned preparing PowerPoint slides as things that they really would like to spend less time doing, and so on. Project management. So that's a little introduction. So what is generative AI? And although AI research kind of has been going on for 80 years with peaks and troughs of activity, the most significant technical event in this particular surge of activity was a research paper by Google scientists in 2017. And I'm not competent to explain its significance, but I read that this single concept of the transformer model has had a cascading impact, establishing a new paradigm in machine learning. And so then OpenAI started producing GPT models, and you can see that GPT-1 in 2018 had 117 million parameters, which I'll mention later. And then 2019, we have 1.5 billion parameters. And GPT-3, which is what was released 2 years ago, 175 billion parameters. So these are getting bigger and bigger in terms of what they do. And then in 2023, we got GPT-4, which has over 1 trillion parameters, and we got offerings from Google with Gemini. We've got Microsoft Copilot, Anthropic Claude, and Meta with Llama. So all these people, the big players in the tech field, all jumping in now with these GPTs and LLMs, large language models. So what are large language models? They are data structures where huge amounts of text are fed in, chopped up, and the constituent words and the relationships between the words are stored and used to output new text probabilistically based on a prompt. They then go through training and fine-tuning so that the output is as effective as possible. And as I said, they now have sometimes trillions of parameters. They are really, really huge. And these big large language models at the moment cost a huge amount of money to produce. And that's why there are free or paid options. And it's also why the free and the personal paid options will generally require that they will use the text that you write for their later training. So they are getting something out of it. And that's why you're getting to use these things for free. So that's what I've said here. And you get, I think it's important to know that a couple of things. One is that there is a data cutoff date when they stop including data for their model before they start training it, and then they have their model release date. And so, for instance, GPT-4, which was released in March 2023, the initial GPT-4, the data was 18 months old at that point. And although there have been updates, you just had to be aware that large language models may not be completely up to date. The other thing I think is useful to mention is that normally the input text that they take to chop up and put into the models, they're not kept. Those are deleted. And all you're left with is this computer program which has these parameters and these words stored. The big players, we have OpenAI, which is the biggest, and they produce ChatGPT. They are funded to a significant extent by Microsoft, who have put in 14 billion dollars, I think, into that. We have Google Gemini, we have Anthropic Claude, and they are funded to a significant degree by Amazon. Meta have a smaller large language model, which is open source, called Llama 3. And Microsoft Copilot, which I'll talk about a bit more, they actually use ChatGPT as their large language model. So those are the names that you will see as you move around. There is also Hugging Face. There are lots of open source large language, small and larger language models, and you can get those by going to Hugging Face, and you can download them or use them or do what you want. So as well as having these, you can then customize the large language models. What you get when you just go in, they can kind of do everything, but these can then be fine-tuned for specific purposes. And so if you go to ChatGPT, you will actually, let's just see if I can see that. If you go to ChatGPT, you say do a new search, you say here explore GPTs, and you can see all these GPTs. Now, I hear that there are 20 million in here and that most of them are really not very good, but some of them are very good. So for example, the ones that OpenAI produce themselves, DALL-E is their main image producing custom GPT. So I really have not gone into these. I have tried some and found them very difficult and not great, but that might be something that I just haven't tried them enough, or there are better ones. But that's useful to know. So they may be custom GPTs like that, or they may appear as separate apps that you use, and whatever's going on behind the app has been customized. And so this produces, you'll get apps that do all sorts of things that are using AI now. There are also small language models, and actually these might be better than large language models for all sorts of reasons. They might be both cheaper, they might be faster for the purposes they're doing, because they don't need everything that's in a large language model. And so you can take a smaller language model, and you may, for example, eventually you may be able to put them on your phone, because that's feasible. So these may become much more important as time goes on. So what is generative AI? It's interacting using natural language. You ask a question, you get a response. And if you know the story game where I say a word and then someone else says a word trying to make up a sentence, a third person tries to keep the sentence going, and so on, where Everyone who says a word knows what went before but has no idea what's going to happen afterwards. That's how I think large language models work. And I'm going to show you a little bit of an example here. If we go to the playground. So here is an OpenAI site. It's a playground. If I put completions here, and if I say I'm having problems with the yeah, that's better. Here I say probabilities, show probabilities, and then I just write something like I like microbiology, and then I submit. What you get is some text, and this is essentially like the ChatGPT, its response. And if it says here, it's done a carriage return. It then says, as a language model, I don't have likes or dislikes. If I redo this, you'll get something different. I enjoy studying different microorganisms. And sometimes, okay, that's great. But if you look at these things, what you can see is that if I click on this word, it says that the word that has a probability of occurring 70% of the time, but you can have all these other things. And now if I've used that, then on the basis of that, great is what comes 98% of the time. Microbiology and so on. And sometimes they are interesting. Okay, it's so for instance here you can see that it didn't take the top pick, it took a different word that was a lower probability. And I can change this by, if I change the temperature to 0 and redo it, what happens is that every time I do it, it's exactly the same, because it always takes the top pick. If I put what they call the temperature higher than 1 and I redo this, I get rubbish. So basically what you have when you do this is you have this sweet spot where it's producing text that makes sense, but is not too similar each time. And so that's what that's how large language models work. And I talked about text being stored in large language models as words, but actually they're tokens. And I'm just going to show you the tokens because I think that's also quite interesting. So again, if I type here, I like microbiology, you can see here how this is actually stored in the model. And so for instance, space microbi is one token, ology is another token, space like is another token. And this kind of makes sense because it's not actually trying to add a word after every word, but it's actually trying to build a sentence, and sentence has spaces and commas and so on, and also words. Microbiology might another time be microbiological. So kind of all these things are possibilities, and so these tokens is how they're broken down. And in fact, this is how large language models how they charge. They charge per token, not per word. And it's also how memory is measured. So ChatGPT, for instance, remembers only the last 32,000 tokens, which is both prompts and responses. So in summary, AI models work with natural language. They produce text probabilistically using word parts or tokens and the context that comes from both the training of the models and the details you add, which might be prompts or documents. They then produce text that is genuinely new each time. Usually repeating leads to different outputs. But the LLMs do not understand what they've said. In fact, if they do something and they say, I've done this, and you say, no, that's wrong, and they say, oh, they say, you're absolutely right, let me do it again. I've done it now, and sometimes they've still done it wrong. And you'll say, it's still wrong. And they say, oh, let me do it again. So they really don't understand at the moment what they've said, even though it feels like they do because you're having a conversation. They can't, for instance, often they can't do things you think are really simple, like counting. You say, do a 7-pointed star, and it produces a 6-pointed star, and then and says, I produced a 7-pointed star, or that sort of thing. They can't at the moment really reason logically, although that's coming a little more. They're programmed to appear very confident, even when what they've done is wrong. And using them effectively can require carefully designed prompts to be useful because they provide the context. And this phrase, prompt engineering, is now used, and this is a skill, and there are courses on how to do this effectively. So, for example, back and forth interaction is often better than just asking things once. Being specific and providing examples of what you want often gets you what you want much more effectively. A couple of concerns that I think I ought to mention. One is privacy, and this is something that comes up particularly in UCL because they are concerned with our data and to make sure that data protection is looked after. So one thing, when you use a large language model, it's important, I think, that you think about whether privacy is an issue. So if I'm writing a letter to a microscope engineer, really doesn't worry me whether anyone sees that or not. So for many tasks, or I'm searching about the history of microscopes, many tasks it really doesn't matter. Some things it will. So a lot of this is really similar to you storing stuff on any cloud computing platform. Are there any issues in terms of that platform, in terms of privacy, data protection, and so on? Data might be temporarily stored for training before it's deleted. That might be an issue. But remember that combinations of words are not stored in the large language models. It has been shown that models can occasionally regenerate parts of text from their training data. So there were some examples where you typed the word, your prompt was the word poem typed 100 times, and eventually the large language model would just start to spit out rubbish, but occasionally the rubbish was actually a bit of a scientific paper, for example. So there are these things that occur. In terms of risk assessment, I'd say this seems to be very rare. It's random. It's not people searching for specific things, and it's been achieved with significant effort. And weaknesses found in this way have been patched. So just be aware if your data is private in any way, and if there is protection against use in LLM training. So for instance, when we use Copilot with our UCL login, Microsoft has said what we put in will not be used in LLM training, so it is secure in that sense. So whatever you're doing, wherever you're doing this, know the terms of conditions of different platforms. Free ChatGPT, they will be using whatever you type in for training. That's one of the conditions, and assume that unless you see otherwise. And just as with any other computing we do, highly sensitive data should anyway not be used. And that's, if you're doing it at UCL, you should be doing it in a different environment. So UCL uses Copilot, and I have been using ChatGPT so far, but Copilot is there. I actually prefer ChatGPT, which is why I've been using it. But we can go to Copilot. And as I said, you sign in for this with your Microsoft, with your UCL account, and it will. And actually, often when you go to Copilot, it will say, is this a work or is this personal? So go to your UCL account, and you go here, and it's exactly the same. So it's fine, and it is using GPT-4 in the background, and so. What is the history of microscopy briefly? And it will it will start doing exactly the same things as you get. So that's what UCL are providing for us at the moment. It's a perfectly good large language model. That doesn't mean that for the non work-related or private bits that you might not want to go to other resources if they have specific advantages. Yeah, so your prompts, questions, and results are protected. Chat data is not saved. Microsoft do not see what you're doing. No one can view your data. Yeah. And they do have a useful feature. I'll just show you this, that if you go here and you say, I've done this, and this is something that others don't have, you can just say, because what you have to do now is you have to cut and paste this and go open up a Word document to push it in there. With Copilot, you can just say copy, and it opens up a thing called, edit in Pages, and it opens up what is a shared document. And it's now, you can invite people to this, you can collaborate, you can each add results from other searches, etc. So that's a really nice thing. I haven't used it, but I can see that for collaborative stuff, it's a really good thing. And you can add images and graphs and all sorts of things into Pages. So I think that is something that you might want to look at. The second issue is that large language models can hallucinate. That means that some or all of their response is untrue. I think of it as they're generating in this word game, they're generating the sentence, the most likely thing that comes next. Something happens and they go down completely the wrong path. And that means they might have factual errors, made up references. So I'll show you that in a sec, contradictions, etc. And so one thing I found, you want to know something, look up yourself. And so I've got this rather, I got this response about my research, and it said that I had this exciting research on serine metabolism in bacteria, which is fine, except I've never done this in my life. So all this is complete rubbish. And they have references, this reference, and when you look at what the reference here, it's actually a list of past presidents of the Microbiology Society. So everything in here looks fantastic. It looks like it's carefully researched, beautifully laid out. Look at this, all the exciting things I've done, which I haven't, and it looks like it's referenced, but actually the reference is completely bogus. More seriously, there have been examples where people have been it's claims that people have done illegal things, and people have been named in that way. So hallucinations. What to do about that? Well, one thing is, does it matter? And for many things, it really doesn't. You know, what's the weather today? Does it really matter? Often you can tell whether it's doing something wrong or not. If it does matter, be aware that this can happen, but you can reduce the risk, and I will come on to this using grounded models through better prompting and asking it, check that, is what you said true? And sometimes it'll say, whoa, maybe not. Let me try again. So trial with something you know, always fact check, keep the source data. And if there are references, if it produces references, you should. So sometimes they're really good because they not only give a reference, they show where in the reference they looked for this particular fact. So that's helpful, but you should also check those references, because just because they say there's a reference and it says this, that's not always true. Yeah, and don't delete your original sources. And remember, this isn't just true of AI. Everything has reliability issues, and we got used, I think, for instance, in Google searches, skimming through results that you thought, well, that's rubbish, and this one looks a bit better, I'll have a look at that, and so on. And so it's a little bit the same. It's just that the output that this produces is really convincing, the way it writes it out sometimes. There are also suggestions there might be technical solutions where they will just, there are ways of working that are just much less prone to this, and maybe that will also be a solution in the future. I mentioned grounding, and grounding, one form, you might also see this acronym RAG, Retrieval-Augmented Generation. Grounding is where you don't just go to the LLM and say, tell me about microscopy, but you also have documents that you upload. Remember that without those documents, this is a large language model that can do everything in the world, and it may be out of date, and it may not look in the right place. But you say, and I want you to look at this particular document. So you upload local files, and you're not just relying on the model. And so it has this side before it goes and does its response, goes to the LLM and produces its response. It actively looks at these texts, not just the things it happens to find in the large language model. I'm going to come on to Google Notebook LM later. This is a grounded model that I think is really interesting. So that's that. What might be genuinely useful? Here's some thoughts, and I've tried to give them a star rating. So searching. So Google search is what we've always used, I think, most of us up till now. And it's great, although I think in recent years it's got steadily worse and more difficult. And you will know that now if you do a Google search, you will know that there is often at the top there is an AI overview. And before you get onto the sponsored results, you'll have a bit here that summarizes for you. And sometimes this is great because you really don't need to go down to this because it tells you what you're actually trying to find. But Google can do that, Google search can do that, but also ChatGPT Copilot can also do that. So if you go to Copilot, at the top of the window, there's a search bar. If you go to ChatGPT, it will often use, in fact, probably both of these will probably often use a search anyway, if they think you need it. But you can actually force them to search. And with ChatGPT, there is this toggle here where you click on it, it will actively, you're saying search the web. So that's and I find, and what I hear from other people, you try different things. Sometimes Google search is better, sometimes it's not. One of the people in the survey said that finding speakers for seminars, they found that the LLMs were better than Google search, for instance. So I think trying to introduce these into your armory of things you do is probably going to save you time. Simple utilities. I find that this works quite well. There's quite a lot of little things that you do when you're sitting at your computer where you're trying to, you've got one file, you've got a JPEG file, and you need to have a PNG file. How do I convert it from this to that? And sometimes it's really fiddly. Sometimes you have to upload it you have to search for something that does that, or you upload it and or whatever. Or you're doing something with some text, and it's just fiddly. Really simple things in Excel. Each time I do it, I need to go and remind myself how to do it. And so here, actually, you can just ask LLMs to do it. And here's an example where this image, it's a PNG file. I just dragged it into ChatGPT and said, convert to JPEG. And it just says, I've converted it to a JPEG. You can download it, and it had done that. Here's another example where I had copied some data off a web page, and it hadn't produced it nicely. What I got was a set of text in a single line with words number. So I just dragged this I copied it into ChatGPT and said, sort this into 2 columns, CSV format. Each row should be a word or phrase and a number. And this is what it produced. So really nice. And actually, just for some things, it's so much quicker than finding that utility that does that sort of thing. So I'd say play with that. Voice, I think, is one of the things which is really amazing. You know, things have got so much better in terms of I used to try to get meetings transcribed, and I was using the automatic tools, and they were really hard work. They were really not very good. Now they are so good. So transcribing voice to text is amazing. Creating realistic voices is amazing. In Teams now, if you have the right Copilot version, you can get simultaneous translation to multiple languages. So I will be talking and you will be hearing me talk in Russian, if that's what you want, or in Croatian. And again, I just think that is completely amazing. So uses will be if you have Copilot 365, which is what we do not have. We only have Copilot. So these are things that to have this, UCL needs to spend a lot of money, and at the moment, maybe very sensibly, it's decided to wait and see. But if you have this, there are Copilot add-ons to each of the MS Office applications. So with Teams, you get records of the meeting. You can turn up halfway through the meeting and say what's happened so far. It'll summarize that. Actions will be produced, and you can get synchronous translations. Auto podcasts, I'll show you in a second. Language learning, I just think this is now, because you can have real conversations, real-time, sensible conversations. I think this is great. So I signed up to a language AI app, which, when you're trying to learn a language, not only it's the hard thing is having a proper conversation with someone at the right level, and that gives you feedback. And now you can do all this. And so this is me doing some French, and you can see where the AI person asked me something. I said something in a halting French, and then it just carried on and said, well, that's interesting, and you know, the next bit. But actually you can then click on the what could I have done better, and it corrected my French and it's explained it, etc. And I just think this is great. Also for people who are not native English speakers, and science is mostly based in English, people who want to improve their English for that, I think this is a fantastic way of doing it. I'll just show you a little bit of no, I won't. I'll come on to that later. Ideas. I think generating ideas is a really good thing that AI can do. It might be what Christmas presents can I get for someone? I heard someone say what they do is they write down their ideas and then they just say to AI, what else? And it just relaxes them, and you can have a conversation and you can say, and another 10, give me another 10 ideas. And it's really helpful. So it can be highly effective. Excellent for starting off something. And it's what LLMs are good for. So either starting off ideas, extending ideas, asking for what do I have to do to get to that goal. And there are specialized apps that I was introduced to a couple of days ago for mind mapping. I'll show you something a little later. So I went into ChatGPT and said, I want to develop a funding application on M-abscessus, MML genes, suggest some specific topics that need answers. And it shot me all these possible things. Now, I don't work on abscessus, MML genes, so I don't quite know how sensible these are, but it's a way of starting. I then said, right, take this one, draw up a timeline of the production of the grant application for me to start planning on the 1st of December and submit by 28th of February. And it produced steps. Initial planning, do this, da-da. Here are the milestones, dates, and here's a Gantt chart for you to look at. They may not be the best steps, but for me, that took me 2 minutes. You know, that is astonishingly effective, I think, at getting going. And of course, at each stage, you can interact with it and say, no, do this rather than that. And you can store this and you can think about it and modify it. I really like learning about concepts through them because this is personalized. So you have something, let's say I want to understand large language models, but you can talk to them and say, how does a large language model work? And then the bit that you don't understand, you can just ask them about that. And it's really effective. That you can just do this iterative questioning, finding about what you don't understand, and you say, I just think it's great. And one of the key things I think about large language models is how personalized it is to what you need. You can also ask for personalized feedback. So you don't want AI maybe to write your documents, but you can feed your documents into AI and say, what's good about this, what's not so good about it. If you're not careful, it's terribly, terribly polite and praises everything, but it will. I was fed in a blog that I wrote several years ago, and I said, suggest specific textual changes, so trying to get something specific, and it's come back with some suggestions. But I think having someone to critique what you've done at any time of night or day, I think is a great idea. And coding, I know some people code and some people don't, but most LLMs can write simple code. They can also, as with your text, they can test your code. They can do the really boring things of documenting your code, testing it. Testing it is really dull. And so, for instance, I'm just going to show you this. If you go to, I'm going to go to Claude, Anthropic Claude, which is here. And so, good morning, it says, how can I help you today? And I'm going to say, write Python code to translate hexadecimal. I can spell it hexadecimal color codes to RGB codes. And here's the code. And so basically it tells you how to do that. And you can then cut and paste this. At the moment, Python cannot render Python in place and make it run, but you can now copy and paste this into your particular Python platform. So code, really good. I'm just going to go back to Claude because there is this thing actually where it does artifacts. So if I say using artifacts, it doesn't render Python, but it does render some code. So for instance, it will render HTML. So using artifacts, which is just a side panel, artifacts, produce a web page for a biologist working on TB. Yeah, let's just say that. Okay, so now it opens the side page. It's producing all the HTML that you need. When it's finished, it should actually render this and show you what it looks like. And you can ask it to do quite sophisticated things. You can ask it to have buttons that press and do this, that, and the other. And the good thing is that with this, again, you can look at the code. You can just copy this, and you can go and paste this into you paste it into a web page and say, produce this HTML, and it will work. So I think that's amazing. And this is only going to get better, I think, in terms of that. So I think that's a good thing. I mentioned Pages, which are in Copilot. Google Notebook LM, I think, is fantastic. I have emailed some of you about this. And this is a thing from Google where it Right, so I'm going to create a new thing. So basically what happens here is if I try and do something now in it and ask a question, it will say I can't do anything because it will only look at documents that you add. If on the other hand, you add some documents, I can do this properly. So these are 3 papers on clinical trials for TB. So it's now looking at these, and very quickly it's done a summary of these 3 papers, and you can toggle these on or off, but it's looking at all 3 at the same time. And very quickly you can say, give me an FAQ on these documents, a study guide, a table of contents. I really like the fact it will do a timeline. And then the fun bit is that you can actually you can get it to generate a podcast. So you can generate a podcast here. It may take a few minutes. My experience is to take about 4 minutes, so maybe we'll come back to that later. And the podcast is, well, again, if it's something you know and you can judge, the one that I did on a paper I helped write, it was really accurate and very engaging, and it can help you. If it's a paper you don't know, it can help you learn about things. So I think it's actually a very good tool. I fed in a 96-page House of Lords AI document into this, and again said, just summarize this. So, and you can now say summarize this, but leave out the bit on ethics. And the people chatting away said, well, we're not going to talk about ethics today, but we'll talk about the rest. So on. So really good tool, and I think we should be trying it. So this is grounded. It's grounded because it focuses on these texts you've added. It's also private in that it will not use these things to be trained. So Google says that this is not used at all, and it's free at the moment. It may not stay free. Another amazing tool, I think, is ChatGPT with Canvas. And the reason why this is amazing is that one of the big pains of using LLMs is that although it's good that they produce different stuff each time, it's a real pain. So let's just say you ask something and it says it produces something. So I'm going to and then you think, well, that's 90% right. And then you say, well, can you do this, but can you add something else? It will do it again. It'll be different, and a different 10% will be wrong. And each time, so you spend a lot of time just trying to fiddle to get that right. But now in ChatGPT-4 with Canvas, there are different options. You have to choose the one that says with Canvas, and you say, using Canvas, describe the sections of the orchestra. And so now, again, we have a side panel, and this is obviously how things are going to go. There'll be your chat here, and there'll be a side panel. And you see it's described the orchestra. Now, what's fantastic is you say you can get to do it again, but actually, let's just say I wanted to change this bit. I wanted this bit to be a bit longer, or I didn't like something. I can now, if you can see this, I've shaded this, and it says Ask ChatGPT. Now it's only going to look at this bit, so all the rest is going to stay the same. So I'm going to say expand this and mention saxophones. And it'll say sure thing. Now all the rest stays the same, and this is, for me, it's kind of game changing. It's just so much better. Now I noticed it didn't mention saxophones this time, but I'm not going to worry about that because we haven't got so much time, because I want to show you this. So you can then say add a new section here about something, and it'll do that. But you can also you can see there's a thing saying add final polish, so you can get it to kind of tidy up the text. you can say, what reading level do you want? And you can say, well, actually, do I want graduate school, which means all the words get longer, or do I want middle kindergarten? Personally, I find middle school level is actually quite a good level for skimming things. So let's change this to middle school level. And it just slightly simplifies it. So it's changed the level. Not only that, you can say, how long do you want to be? And you can say longer or shorter. So let's say we want to make it, let's make it a bit longer. And you can do this for a section that you shaded in as well. So now you can see it's longer. And if we want to make it shorter, let's just say we're going to make just this. Let's see if this works. Just make this one shorter. And it should just shorten that bit. So it's just shortened that bit. For me, I think this is just amazing because it's one of the things that it completely changes how useful it is in terms of using things and not having to copy them back and forth into word processors. Images, good but not great. I think they produce interesting things, but they're quite hard to work with sometimes. Again, it's a bit random what you get. I like the fact that it avoids copyright issues for me because I spend my time trying to find an image for a blog or something, and all the ones that are reasonable have, quite rightly, they have some copyright, and that just makes it hard and it takes me time. Now I know that everything that comes out of these images will be copyright free. So there are many of these. I actually compared several. I said, do a let's suppose I'm doing a blog on TB and I have someone with a vial saying TB drugs and one saying vaccines, and these are different things that got produced. I also got people with 6 fingers occasionally, or hands, 2 hands. So sorry, 2 hands on each side. So weird stuff happened as well. So it's quite fun, but it's still, I think, not great. Mind mapping, I was introduced this the other day. There are different sorts of mind mapping things. And again, I think these are really good because you just say, I just typed in developer course on GenAI for academic researchers. It did that, and it either did from an organizational point of view or from the subject point of view. And there are all sorts of apps that do this in different ways, and I think they're great. And in fact, if you start looking online, there are hundreds of apps, search, content generation, general assistance, So there are so many things out there that I haven't even started to look at. Minutes, I have failed to do. You need Copilot 365 with Teams, I think. PowerPoint, I really struggled. I trying to get PowerPoint. There are some apps that do presentations, but they're very, very different programs. If you want PowerPoint, we really need Copilot 365. PubMed, I had real problems with good searching of the internet. They would produce 6 or 7 references, not all of them. I had difficulty. Diagrams, I think, would be great, rather than occasionally you can get flow diagrams. Those work quite well, but just more intricate diagrams of I liked a diagram of the procedure that's happened in a paper, for instance. I haven't managed to get that to work. So personally, I'd say start small, focus on what you want to get done. Start maybe with something you actively dislike. Someone write down the things that you really like doing and carry on doing them the same way. Don't ask AI to do those because you like doing them. But find the things you really don't want to do and maybe try some of those. So we've covered how GenAI works, LLMs, privacy, hallucinations, UCL's choice is Copilot, and useful things. There is training around UCL and elsewhere. Most people haven't had any. There's a huge amount of stuff on the internet, but there are courses if you want to do them. I do think it would be useful within UCL to have some way of sharing what people do. Use cases are just great because where people say, look, I've done this, this is how it worked, and here's an example. So if we could have some way of doing that, I think that would really help people. So what's coming? This is all very new. I think that many of the things we struggle with now will just be resolved. PCR contamination used to be, for years, was a huge issue that people said this is never going to get solved, and it's just routine now. All the models that do special things, all the other models will soon be able to do those things, I think. Specialized AI is probably going to be more useful than general AI. Autonomous agents, things that do very specific jobs on whatever website you're using, they are coming. They will be here very soon, as in January. I think Microsoft are launching some. Personalized agents that know everything you do and can remember across applications, they're coming if that's what you want. And for some things, I think that would be great. And they will start to join together different processes much more effectively. So all moving very fast. It's quite exciting, and it's probably a good time. I think this is a good time to dip your toe into it. It can be genuinely useful, but it is just an extra tool, and other things may be the way to go as well. It's a skill, so it's not something that just happens, because it's not just easy, and you have to practice and learn how to use, like with any program. I think personalization is key, what you need at the level you need it. If accuracy is important, then think how to check your output. And probably the best results come from human AI interaction and using it with all the other tools we use already. And just as an example, I just thought it's Christmas, so in a private Copilot environment, I uploaded some CCM minutes, some of our WhatsApp chat, the Christmas menu for our Christmas meal, and said create Christmas song lyrics. And then I took what it produced as lyrics and pushed it into the Suno, which is a song creating AI. And I just thought you might like to have a Christmas song to finish up with. So this is the CCM Christmas song for 2024.
In the lab there's a festive scene as we celebrate this year's routine. We've autoclaved and played it all year long. Now we'll raise our voices in a Christmas song. We face the trials, the monitoring stress, but now it's time for some happiness. Let's raise a toast to the lab team too, and all the tasks we've managed to do. The T-Scan's alarm rings loud and clear, but we'll ignore it as Christmas is here. We'll leave the freezers, the fridges behind, and focus on relaxing and peace of mind. The minutes remind us of meetings we've held, of rotas and budgets, stories we tell. So let's forget the protocols, the forms we must sign, and indulge in some festive wine. It's Christmas time at the lab, you see. Time to be jolly and happy and free. We'll swap our lab coats for festive attire and gather round the Christmas fire. We'll feast on the menu, a delicious spread, from turkey and beef to the nut roast instead. The roebuck awaits with its Christmas cheer, a night of laughter we'll hold so dear. We'll reminisce on the moments we've shared, the friendships we've forged, the knowledge we've gained. So raise a glass to the year that's gone by, and to the future with hope in our eye. It's Christmas time at the lab, you see. Time to be jolly and happy and free.
And that's it.
That's brilliant. Thanks, Neil. I'm sure that's got everybody laughing the song. It's totally amazing. I mean, thank you, Neil. That's a really great whistle stop through a whole load of stuff I knew nothing about. Maybe other people know more about. Really interesting and really useful. I think I'm thinking about live translator in meetings. That might be useful. The notepad for summarizing papers, cutting word counts down when you're writing papers, loads of things where it might be useful. So thank you, and I'll open up for questions. I guess my only other question was, will people just forget how to write, and does that matter?
I think that so for me one of the problems is that like where I said produce a grant proposal, and it produces 2 pages, and I find that I don't look at it really, because I didn't produce it. So there is something about you have to kind of involve yourself somehow. I don't think that I think it depends on what you're doing. I think a lot of the stuff that will be produced by companies for, where they need news every day, I think a lot of it will be 99% AI and not used, not with no human involvement. For what we do, I think that you just have to realize that you need to understand what you're doing, and that's what I'm saying. It should be a partnership with you and AI.
Isabel.
So yeah, I think it's really interesting. I think it's really useful, and I am using it myself. But I think there are boundaries, and I think sometimes it's hard to know where they are, because if it generates all the ideas, do we stop being able to think? And obviously the IQ of AI is, I think IQ is a difficult measure for AI, but it's so much higher than ours. But at what point is that not your work anymore? And obviously, in terms of teaching, this has become a big problem for students writing essays and things. So I think it's really interesting the point you made, Anna, of we stop being able to write, and if you never learn that skill in the first place, and will we end up in a situation where we can't think for ourselves anymore? We run to AI all the time to check the answer. But I guess it's like any tool, isn't it, that it's can be used for good or for bad. But I think it's definitely food for thought. So thank you for giving that overview, Neil. I think it's really important we all know about it.
Can I just say that I went on a UCL course, an academic education department course about using AI in assignments for students, and it's something that UCL is embracing, and they have to, because they know that you can't ban AI. And basically how do you use AI in assessments? And they have 3 types of assessments. One where AI cannot be used, and those will be in-person exams, that sort of thing. There'll be ones where you can use them as part of the process, and there'll also be ones where AI is actively used, and part of the point is to use it together. And I think part of it is, yes, you shouldn't use it all the time, but I think there are times when you really should be using it, and the students had to be prepared for life in a world where they need to use this effectively. So, yeah.
Was there a question? I saw a question from Cameron, but is that a question from the office? Hand was up and then gone down. I don't know if there's questions in the room.
Yeah, well, less of a question, more of a statement or comment. When I was doing my fellowship at SciDev, which is a media company, this was something I was looking at in terms of doing photos and generating photos. And I think you do have to be a bit careful with some of them, because a lot of them generate photos from Google searches. And so some of them you might be able to identify sort of the background picture from. So Firefly doesn't. Firefly uses its own Adobe collection of pictures, and because you pay for it, that means you get them royalty free. But I think you do have to be careful with some of the free ones, because I think they take images from just general internet searches. I don't know, Neil, if you came across that, but that was what I was told. I had to be quite careful using ChatGPT, for instance.
Well, yeah, the pictures you can see now, these are from ChatGPT. I think some of them, a lot of what what gets produced automatically is kind of slightly weird, fantasy type, aesthetic. the Firefly, I agree that one of Adobe's big things is that it has been very careful about what it's put in, and it makes all these statements. Yeah, I don't know is the answer to that. I do know that there are people there are all sorts of legal cases at the moment in terms of New York Times saying that ChatGPT needs to pay it lots of money for what it's done, and I'm sure image-wise there's all sorts of things. Certainly songs. I think there's a lot of concern in the music industry where they say that that music that I've just produced, they'll say, well, actually that came from our copyrights, but usually they are changed. And I have to say that if I produce my understanding when I was producing distance learning materials is that I can copy something else. I can copy something that you have produced and copyrighted, but now it's my copy. At that point, it stops being copyright. So there's all sorts of weird copyright things. But yeah, I'm sure there's lots of things to come out in the wash.